Let us discuss question 9 to 12. So this passage was about white collar crime and not about the crime per se, but about the development of theories regarding white collar crime, right? So it's slightly academic in nature. Now, the passage begins by saying that we don't have a lot of theory in this field. And what researchers do is that uh, they actually use the theories meant for traditional crimes and they apply them to white collar crimes, right? So that tells us that how, where these traditional theories are lacking and what kind of improvements are needed for them to become more appropriate for white collar crime. So it tells us that, right? But the author highlights that the problem with this approach is that, you take the traditional crime theories and then you just look at them and identify their deficiencies. The problem with this approach is that it does not produce any new knowledge per se. It is not producing any new knowledge. It is just telling you the deficiencies of the previous theory, the traditional theory, right? So it says we need to move beyond this kind of a traditional approach. So what can we do? The author talks about something called a critical perspectives approach. The author states that this critical perspectives approach looks at the state corporate crime perspective, right? One of the perspectives here is looking at the nexus between the government and corporations to produce white collar crime, right? So the author says that, this has evolved as a framework to consider how social harm is produced through the intersection of private capital, private firms, and governmental interests. Then the author elaborates on this. All right. So the author says that this can actually reveal to us that, for example, the author mentions a study by Palmer and Maher and how that revealed to us that the meltdown that happened, the mortgage meltdown in the US that happened, that was a result of trade deficits, a deregulation of the financial sector, and an intensification of capital inequality. How governmental and structural factors were involved in the economic event that happened. Then the author says that although, this is a useful approach, it provides us a unique way of thinking about the structural origins of white collar crime. There are certain difficulties with this approach. What are the difficulties? The difficulties are in data collection. There are methodological difficulties in analysis of that data, right? So, for instance, it says that even the study that was conducted by Palmer and Maher, the study about mortgage meltdown that I cited earlier, they said that, this mortgage meltdown emerged as a consequence of the tightly coupled and complex financial system, that the financial system had become too complex and it was too tightly associated. One thing was very closely associated with the other. But then they also acknowledge this, that they were unable to determine whether the financial system was sufficiently complex and tightly coupled so as to produce an analysis. So there are methodological difficulties that are involved in using the critical perspectives approach to the development of white collar crime. This is what has been given to us. Okay, so I just summarized this passage for you. The genre is criminology to be specific, sociology to be more general. 539 words, right? Let's look at the questions. Ninth, a fundamental conclusion by the author regarding the development of white collar crime theory is that, okay, so you need to understand this question. We want a conclusion regarding the development of white collar crime theory. I am not looking at feminist perspectives here, right? Then, if you look at A, this is talking about the traditional approach and how we are just adding the white collar crime perspective to the traditional approach, right? So, even this is not a fundamental conclusion regarding the development of white collar crime theory. This just echoes what is stated in para 1, that the traditional approach where you put the dimensions of white collar crime to various street crimes or traditional crimes, it only identifies the deficiencies of mainstream theories, right? It does not comment on the development of white collar crime theory. So this is not a fundamental conclusion. Then critical perspectives focus on institutional sources of power and how they cause social harm. This is one of the ways, one of the areas in white collar crime theory, one of the approaches. Let's compare C with D. D says the methodological difficulties in collecting data on white collar crime and relevant variables limit theory development in the field. This is something that has been acknowledged by the author in the last paragraph. Right? Uh, See this. It says, with a few exceptions, it is difficult to formally test research hypotheses and refute alternative arguments. The challenge rests with methodological difficulties and with collecting useful data that validly and reliably measure both white collar crime and relevant predictor variables, problems that affect theory development in the white collar crime area more generally. So, this is not just a problem with the critical perspective approach. This is a problem that affects white collar crime theory development more generally, measuring it and relevant predictor variables, measuring those. So, that is why this is the correct answer here. This is a fundamental conclusion about development of white collar crime theory. Hope this is clear to you, right? This is confined to just the critical perspectives approach. We are looking at the theory in general, right? Eliminated. Traditional approach, narrow, eliminated. Feminist perspectives, not related. This has just been given as an analogy, eliminated. Question 10. The author states that a key problem with the add white collar crime and stir approach is that it does not produce new knowledge per se. Right? Stated as the first sentence of the second paragraph. Which one of the following statements, if true, does not contradict this statement? That means it in a way supports this statement. Right? So I have to support it. Let's see. A says the approach identifies important differences. See, this is crucial here. It identifies important differences between white collar offenders and traditional criminals. That is new knowledge, right? If you're able to identify that these are the important differences between the two. So new knowledge is being produced here, right? And therefore, this is contradicting. This is contradicting the given statement, right? B says the approach reveals insights into high level organizational white collar crime. This is absolutely new knowledge, and therefore, this is also contradicting what has been stated. See, the approach demonstrates the limitations of existing traditional crime theory and the need to expand its conceptual framework. This is something that has been acknowledged by the author also in para 1, that fine, these traditional approaches, they tell us that okay, this is the deficiency of the traditional theory and we need to expand the conceptual framework. Then the author says in second paragraph, but then this is not new knowledge. Just identifying theories, just identifying deficiencies in mainstream theories and saying that, oh, we need better conceptual framework, this is not producing new knowledge, right? So, this is the one that supports the author's assertion that it does not produce new knowledge. It has been acknowledged by the author in para 1. Okay, and if it reveals insights into the process of white collar crime, that's definitely new knowledge. So, this is again contradicting the given statement. C is the answer here. Okay, 11th. Which one of the following is not a valid inference from the passage? Okay, so what cannot be inferred? That means 3 of them will be inferences from the passage. A. Critical perspectives, though beneficial, come with their own set of problems. Okay, this is something that is discussed in the last paragraph, that yes, this theory, this approach, it has its own set of methodological problems. B. The complexity and coupling of a financial system can be measured. Yes, because that is why, Palmer and Maher, they said this, that they could not identify whether the system was sufficiently complex or sufficiently tightly coupled. That means it should be in the first place possible to measure it. Then only you will be able to comment on the degree, right? So they are commenting on the degree, that means it can be measured. So this is a valid inference from the passage. Between C and D, the government can produce social harm. This is given to us when we talk about the state corporate crime perspective, that the government can produce social harm in 2 ways, initiation and facilitation. Refer to that paragraph. C is the answer, because that very paragraph, the one that talks about state corporate crime perspective, also says that in modern society, government cannot be separated from the corporate sector. Okay, if you want to verify, you can go back and see this. emphasizing that state-corporate relations cannot be separated from one another in modern society. Okay, so this then becomes the opposite of what is stated in the passage, right? And if something is the opposite of what is stated in the passage, we'll definitely say, oh, this cannot be inferred. C is the answer. Question 12. Which one of the following sets of words or phrases best encapsulates the issues discussed in the passage? Okay, let's have a look. First things first, the entire passage talks about white collar crime theory. So any option to be correct should have these words white collar crime, right? A does not have these words. I eliminated it. D again does not talk about, again does not have those words white collar crime. So what is the traditional approach that we are discussing? What is this critical perspectives theory related to? What is the state corporate approach? See, it doesn't even mention crime here. Eliminated. The choice is between B and C, right? Now let's compare the two. B talks about this traditional approach, which the author has called add white collar crime and stir approach. Then beyond this approach, the state corporate crime approach is a part of what the author calls critical perspectives. It is one of the critical perspectives. The state corporate crime perspective is one of the critical perspectives. So mentioning critical perspective is more important than mentioning state corporate crime approach, right? So let's have a look at C. White collar crime theory, traditional approach limitations. Yes, this is specifically discussed. Critical perspectives, important, has been covered, and then the difficulties that are presented in the last paragraph. So C is more appropriate when compared to B, and hence it is the answer. Hope this is clear to you.